Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I welcome all of you back to another Christian Quickie reading, and what's probably going to be the last when it comes to Chris's views on society. We come to Chris and his views on sexuality. I mention views because it specifically states this article is specifically about sexual orientations. For Chris's general views in relationship with human sexuality, see Chris and sex. Now, I should also make mention of the fact that there are like several subsidiary articles about this, some of which we've covered before, but ideally we're going to have to cover every single one of these as its own little mini article. So if this is something that is up your alley, not a euphemism, but nevertheless, if this is what you are particularly into, and it is what it is. And by the way, again, just for what they're worth, there are no what's the word I'm looking for? There are no judgments here. We're all friends here, and we should just keep it at that. So, for what they're worth, I would ask people to just be respectful in the comments and not to, just try and behave in the comments when it's about this sort of stuff. Despite what we might think of Chris. I mean, I know what I think of Chris when it comes to this, but I'm just putting it out there. We can kiss at the future time. Chris declaring his love for amateur sorcerer Jacob Sockness. Thankfully, this did not happen, and it's never going to happen, and that's that. To this day, Chris's sexuality is very bizarre. Before Bob's death, Chris had an intense fear of falling off the straight path. He feared that being in contact with gay people, he himself would pick up the gay virus. And his love quest would take a complete 180. He then identified himself as a lesbian trans woman with a lesbian soul. Later, the idea guys brainwashed him into identifying as bisexual. Homosexuality. As stated above, Chris used to have an irrational fear towards homosexual men, particularly out of fear that he himself would become gay himself. I'm refraining from using this phrase because, well, you could probably work out for yourselves. This strange idea stems from his belief that all homosexual men wish to push their sexuality onto other people. Ironically, this is an idea that a lot of people who say they're not homophobic, but they say all the things that would point them in that life. I don't. They would say stuff like, "I don't hate gay men," but you know what I'm saying, pushing their agenda onto. Well, guess what? You don't have to accept it. That's not that even. Oh god, okay, I know this is getting way off topic this early on, but I'm just gonna say this for the record right now. I have quite a lot of gay friends. One of my closest friends, who I've known for over 10 years, got married 3 years ago. She's very happy. They have adopted a young boy together, and they are fantastic parents. You know what? That's how that is. And you know what? At no point did they ever bring up their sexuality in front of me, and at no point did they ever try and force it, or all the other way around. It's not, And also, again, I've got gay friends as well, gay men and stuff like that. And at no point did they ever think to forcing this sexual, because what Chris doesn't seem to understand is that in the real world, when you have real friends, or when you interact with real people, not just people on the television, is that actually people are far more concerned. They have more social tact than Chris would give them credit for. Is what I'm getting across. Chris's main justification for his hatred towards homosexual men was that they supposedly go against God's will. Oh, for fuck's sake. Is it going against God's will for his children to be happy? You tell me. Because listen, I'm a Roman Catholic myself, and I couldn't give a shit about what people are gonna do whatever they want, no matter what it says in the Bible, the Torah, the Quran. Just live and let live. I don't care, and people think they have a right to care more than they do, and they shouldn't when it's nothing to do with them. You know what I mean? And even used Stewie Griffin's citation of Leviticus as evidence that homosexuality is a sin, despite it being an obvious joke that flew over his head. it's staggering that Chris views Family Guy as more of a reflection of actual society and reality in general than it comes to, things that actually happen in the real world. In which Stewie Griffin has shown homoerotic desires throughout Family Guy, while citing why homosexuality is a sinful act. Bisexuality. Up until 2014, Chris hasn't been too open on his views on bisexuality. Beforehand, he has hinted traces of tolerance towards bisexuality. Though, in Mailbag 33, Chris has hinted that his views on bisexuals were almost no different from his views on homosexuals. When asked about bisexuality, along with other sexualities, Chris simply replies that while people of all sexualities deserve to be treated equal, good start, only marriage between man and woman are allowed. One step backwards. Implying that Chris may have been somewhat accepting of bisexuals due to one side of them being attracted to the opposite sex. According to the answers he submitted on a list of OkCupid questions in mid-2014, he would consider dating a bisexual. On the same list of questions... I think my ear just popped. On the same list of questions, there is a question which asks, if you were going to have a daughter, which sexual orientation would you hope she would have? And gives the choices straight, lesbian, bisexual, and it wouldn't matter to me as possible answers. Chris chose it wouldn't matter to me as his answer, hinting once again that besides being tolerant towards straights and lesbians, he seemed to show some amount of tolerance towards bisexuals too. Now, you may argue whether Chris was encouraged or maybe thought to do this because it would make him appear more tolerant and attracted towards women is a good case in point, but knowing how Chris will vehemently stick to his morals and principles no matter what, I can't really say if Chris did this for the reasons he thinks or not. I'm not entirely sure. Although, seeing how he hasn't fully accepted male homosexuals until late 2014, exactly, this could be because the question was asking specifically about his daughter, which means that either way, she's straight or lesbian, a win-win situation. Some people tend to confuse bisexuality with pansexuality, the attraction towards all sorts of people regardless of their sex, gender identity, or sexuality. Chris appears to be one of these people. On August 2014, Chris announced that his character, Christine Rosechew, is bisexual. He has later claimed that as a bisexual, Christine Rosechew is attracted to just about everyone. I'm not entirely sure if that's how bisexuality works. That's more omnisexual, if anything else. But then again, attracted to anybody could also means that you could just get along with people no matter what, which is not necessarily the same thing as asexuality, but it's interesting because the only thing I wanted to mention is the fact that there's any character in Solitude that is sapiosexual, which, again, for what they're worth, I should say sapiosexuality is when a person is attracted to a person of intelligence. The idea being is that people respect others who are wise, who display knowledge that is beyond their years, and is something that isn't exactly unheard of. It's absolutely a thing that a lot of people are a little bit more open towards because, well, some people ironically view the idea as very snobbish and that it just isn't a thing. But hey, I know quite a number of people who are sapiosexual as well, and it's just what I know. Again, this probably wasn't presented to Chris, probably because he only saw sexuality as either straight, gay, lesbian, bi, and trans. But and Chris even claims himself there are over 58 sexual genders, but if Chris could only name 5, well, again, it for what they're worth, I suppose. Not when it comes to things like asexuality, pansexuality, among other things as well. Some people tend to... which towards August announced... Okay. In 2017, he commented on a Huffington Post article to offer sympathy to a bisexual woman. In March 2018, the Idea Guys brainwashed Chris into believing he was in relationships with fictional male characters Kunti Nugget and Magi-chan, and this meant he was bisexual in real life. The unfortunate thing with this is the idea that all you have to do is convince Chris, and then he'll decide to change sides. Whether or not Chris really believes this is still something I can't honestly say, because if Chris is just that easy to deceive, then how do we know that what Chris's opinions truly are, if they're not motivated by him but controlled by external sources? Asexuality. Some autistic people simply do not understand sexual attraction. Also, they just don't really want to feel sexual attraction. There's also that. For example, high-functioning autistic and Hugbox inventor Temple Grandin chooses to be celibate because she admits that she really does not understand sexual attraction, and that she lacks the ability, as a consequence of her autism, to engage in a sexual relationship. This could explain some of Chris's views regarding sex and romance. He generally cannot understand the appeal of most sexual activity, aside from the fact that he's seen people in the media do it, and that he thinks that sex is something all men need to experience in order to become complete adults. Although Chris did at one point says that the virgin breaker must happen before adulthood arrives. But wouldn't you become an adult by, losing your virginity? Chris kind of needs to understand what he's talking about before he actually says it. As the act of sexual intercourse and relationships in general are fairly social activities, it's quite possible that Chris views the act of losing his virginity as something as a rite of passage, something he needs to do in order to validate his own sexuality and prove to the world he's a capable adult. Chris also fails to realize that relationships are very much give and take. Every sweetheart that Chris has ever had, which eventually turned out to be a troll, involved long-received relentless emails and calls in which Chris prattled on about how much he loved them and how much he was looking forward to finally having sex. After supposedly losing his virginity, it's unknown if he still craves sexual intercourse as much as he did before. One thing was still certain, however, is that he still fervently desired the attention of a sweetheart. Upon first meeting Catherine in person, Chris admitted that he wanted to spend the entire day with her. That's slightly more creepy than I would say revolving around anything about sexuality, but there you are. With Jess, hang on, where were we? Such as go bra shopping, then have her spend the night at his house, and then he would get breakfast for her in the morning. With Jess, he talked about how they were to meet in person, and then the next day go to the My Little Pony movie screening, implying she would spend the night. He also has a habit of staring at women's chests. I'll get into this a little bit more when I do like a separate article about Chris actually being an adult, because, well, we'll get to that when it comes to it. After he introduced the term by his mailbag correspondence, Chris took to interpreting and using asexual as an insult. In his Wikipedia page on the Wallflower, he referred to her as a goddang asexual woman. He also became very offended when Jackie implied that he liked video games more than women, ranting that she would not label him as asexual and missed her point completely. However, considering Chris's incessant shoehorning of entirely unnecessary sex into the comics, and the ludicrous efforts he goes to get some china, he does seem to possess sexual desire, though not necessarily for women, as these things could simply be part of his efforts to disprove his much-feared homosexuality. Further, an asexual does not necessarily look for sex in a relationship. Most asexuals seek romantic partners or just prefer platonic friendships. Chris, however, seems to develop sexual feelings for every girl he meets and appears to believe it as required. Not to mention during the Addams saga, he mentioned wanting to bring Megan to Washington to change her mind on sex after she told him she was asexual. Whether she is or said it to get her off his back is not known, and make her the mother of Crystal. Although it's unlikely that Chris is asexual, especially after recent events. It is worth noting, though, that some asexual people do have a sex drive, just no sexual attraction. They're turned on by the physical sensation of pleasure, not by the person. For them, orgasming is just an undirected human function, like scratching an itch or going to the bathroom. They can enjoy masturbation or even sex, but there's no actual emotional connection or lust involved. In the Solitude comics, number 10, Chris listed asexuals as those who needed to be cured by drinking the contaminated straight water. It has been said that he feels asexuals are missing out, as he views having alleged change on other sexualities, i.e. gay men and bisexuals. Whether or not his views on asexuals have changed remains a mystery. Oh, sorry about that. Like, something's like deep in my throat. Though I will say is that they are missing out. So apparently Chris's ideas is that you have to be one or the other, and there is no room for any ambiguity. And Chris doesn't consider himself a dictator. Well, what a surprise. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the article for Chris and Sexuality. The only thing, I feel like I can add that would be of any use at this point is the idea that, well, Chris's views and what he says about them are entirely his own, and unfortunately when it comes to Chris is that, well, like I said before, sometimes it's better just not to say anything, because Chris sometimes will say things completely unprompted, no matter who it offends, and if it doesn't involve him whatsoever. Chris never really seemed to grasp the concept of just because it may be okay for you, but it's not okay for other people. But what do you expect, Chris? That if it doesn't involve, or if Chris doesn't benefit in any way whatsoever, then he will just throw it away. That's what it is to Chris, and I'm very sorry. And with all that being said and done, I hope all of you guys have enjoyed this article, and I cannot wait to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now.